Can you use what you are talking about, the methods, I'm assuming, to find a murdered friend's body?
Oh, actually, yes, you can do the Akashic record scan. What you can do is you can access the higher self of the person who is murdered, and the higher self can direct you to the murdered body. Yes, that can be done. That's what psychics do. They actually help the police.
Yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, I know a few, and the ones that actually see the crime scenes as if they, it's almost like when they're visiting the area that the
Yeah, like
location.
it's like doing it's like a remote viewing kind of thing.
Yeah,
What you're
it's
doing.
scary. How
Yeah,
I
same
could
principle.
personally, I couldn't handle watching that. Literally, even though it
Yeah, well, I
happened,
mean,
I
I'm not.
couldn't imagine happening.
It's not what I want to have popcorn with either. You know, I mean, it's not a top 10, but there are people that do that, and yes, there are. But I should give. I want to give some very important advice to your listeners. I am. I sometimes I feel like I'm Houdini in a way, in the sense that I've a lot of psychics have contacted me and they want referrals and blah blah blah. Most of the psychics I've ever interviewed or known are complete phonies. They're all real psychics out there, but you want to test them first. 95% of them are as phony as a $3 bill. But the way you test a psychic is this. You don't give them any information. You wear old clothes. Don't wear any jewelry, and just simply, if they ask you questions, simply shut up and say, "You're the psychic, you tell me." If they're really
Nice.
real, they'll do it. Because when a psychic asks you questions and wants you to talk, that's how they get their information to give you a reading. So don't contribute. Just simply say, "Mum's the word, read me." And if they can't do that, they're phony.
And that, like you said, that's the majority of them. And that's actually true
Majority,
because
yeah,
each
majority.
answer you give them is very telling.
Well, let me give you an example of a typical profile or MO of a psychic. This is a phony psychic. It's usually a woman who's 50 pounds overweight, wearing a muumuu, cash only, with a crystal ball in a tent. That's your typical psychic that you want to keep away from.
Gypsy. Yeah, that's what I find.
Well,
Being
yeah,
from
but I mean,
Greece.
they don't have to be gypsies. They just come across that way. But they look like the woman in a Wolfman movie. That would be the type of person you're looking at. Okay.
Okay, this is from now. What about the manipulation from the Anunnakis, whom have control over our evolution?
No, the Anunnaki do not have control over our evolution. I respectfully disagree with 45 years of experience to your caller there, okay? Wrong. El Wrongo. Nobody has control over our evolution, okay? The Anunnaki only come here every 3,600 years, if they come here at all, and they're a long time overdue, so don't worry about the Anunnaki. I'm well familiar with the concept. Zachariah Sitchin, the late Zachariah Sitchin's work, but nobody controls us, okay? We control us.
Free
No
will.
entity does.
Yeah.
Free will, yes.
This is a question from Philip Blair. This is an important one. How did Dr. Goldberg get started in his work? So, flashback 45 years. What got you to leave from being a dentist into doing what you
Okay,
do?
so let me give you my personal story here, okay? I don't discuss this commonly, but it's kind of fun. So we talk about me being not a New Age person. I went to college in the 60s, and when people were sitting there with their, astrological signs around their neck, and getting high on pot and talking about the age of Aquarius, I wasn't into that at all. Not that I hated it. I was more concerned about graduating with honors and going to dental school. That was my thing, okay? So now I'm in dental school. I'm a sophomore, and I got involved with astrology. I took an astrology course because I met this woman who was a Leo, and as a Scorpio, it's not a good combination. So I wanted to know why there were so many problems. So astrology seemed to be the answer, and I said, okay, this is kind of cool. So I was starting getting into New Age. And then one fine day, I was during the summer of my sophomore year, I was working as a security guard, and I was working a double shift, so I was really tired. It's a hot day, right? In Baltimore, it's like 99% degrees with 99% humidity. You know what I mean? It's really not a cool climate for the summer. So I go home to my little brain-dead apartment from this double shift, and I'm dressed in my little security guard uniform, and I'm really tired. And I lived in this little apartment like what they call a row house, the ground floor, there was a living room and kitchen, and then up floor, the bedrooms were upstairs.
Hmm.
And I just plopped on the couch. I didn't even have the energy to go upstairs. I was so tired. So I'm taking a nap, right? And it's like a Saturday afternoon. And all of a sudden, I wake up, and there's a voice in my head. Now, I'm not schizophrenic here, and this voice said to me, go to the Aquarian Age bookstore downtown. okay? And I figured, wow, I mean, what is this? Maybe it's my higher self, so why should I argue with it? So I figured, okay. So all of a sudden I had my energy back, and I get into my car. It's only a 5-mile trip, so I go down to the Aquarian Age bookstore. I'm still wearing my uniform, by the way, right? I have no idea why I'm there, but I figured this is an adventure. So I go into this bookstore. This was like a speakeasy in the 1920s. It's a really cool little place. I don't know if it's still there. And I see this woman about 6.5 feet tall, dressed in a white toga with a blonde hair curled up like a Greek goddess. She comes from the back of the aisle up to me, and she looks at me. She's standing right in front of me, and she says, "I have been waiting for you." And I said, looking at her, I said, "Hey, I've been waiting for you all my life. What's up?" She goes, "Come with me." I think, okay. So she takes me to the back of the bookstore, and she reaches up. Remember, she's 6.5 feet tall. She puts a book down, pulls it from the shelf, and she says, "Take this book. It will change your life." And the book was The Search for Bridey Murphy. If you're not familiar with it, it was written by a man named Maury Bernstein, who I eventually met later on. He was a Colorado businessman, a layperson, not a doctor, and he did a very famous case of past life regression with a woman from his town that reincarnated into the late 1700s, early 1800s as a woman named Bridey Murphy from Cork, Ireland. It was a very documented case. It was made into a movie, a Broadway play, best-selling book. And that book actually got me into the field of doing past life therapy. And eventually, of course, I evolved into future life progression, working with extraterrestrials, time travelers, psychic protection, out-of-body experiences, etc. But that incident was the one that got me started. So in answer to your caller's question, that was the changing time in my own little paradigm of my life's direction.
Now, 6.5 foot tall, and you said like a white toga. I'm thinking not from this world, or not from this time.
No, I mean she could be the equivalent of Aaron Judge from the New York Yankees. He's 6'7". Okay, he's not from Zeta Reticuli. He's a human being from the Earth plane. There are people. Look at basketball players. Some of them are 7 feet tall.
That's true. That's absolutely true, or higher even. Some are.
But actually, I did find out the eventual person, who that person was. So years later, I'm now developing the fifth dimensional travel technique, right? So I'm going into the fifth dimension, which I've been 3,000 times, right? So one fine day, I go into the fifth dimension, and I want to summon a time traveler, because I've met time travelers in the fifth dimension, just like your listeners could do if they used my techniques. So I'm in this like conference room in the fifth dimension. It looks like a conference room, like you might go in your lawyer's office, It's a fifth dimensional room, right? So I'm sitting there with my higher self, and I said, I want to meet a time traveler. So my higher self says, be patient, give me a few seconds. So all of a sudden, a time traveler appears in this conference room, in this fifth dimensional conference room, and guess who it is? The Greek goddess from 1972.
Wow.
So I look at her, and I said, I know you.
You met her. Yeah, you know her.
Yeah. I said, hey, we got to start meeting this way, And I said, who are you? She's a time traveler from the 36th century, and her purpose in the future was to get me to get involved with the future in my work, because my work was well known in the future. So she was sort of like helping me along to become the person I am today. So that was a very important person in my life. So that was a time traveler from the future, a chrononaut, a hot chrononaut.
Speaking about time travel, can we go back in time and give ourselves advice? That's another question.
Well, you can. Yeah, you. Here's the problem. This is called the grandfather paradox. Let's talk about that. The grandfather paradox is: suppose you go back in time, like Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future Part 1, and let's say you kill your grandfather. Does that mean you disappear? The answer is no. Because if you go back in time, you're going to travel into a parallel universe, not the current one. So if you killed your grandfather or did something else, it's going to be not affecting you in this universe. So yes, you can give yourself advice, but you're giving yourself advice in a parallel universe, not in the current one.
Yeah, I've heard, that the grandfather paradox, just for the reasons that you explained, doesn't fit because, if you are going back, to meet or to kill him, that's a whole separate dimension right there. You're creating another timeline.
Actually, technically, the way quantum physics works, there's an infinite number of parallel universes. Every time you have a thought, you create a parallel universe, which has all the planets, all the solar systems, all the stars, all the black hole, everything. So that's why you're never going to have to worry about hurting yourself. Now, you can't advise yourself either. I know all these Hollywood plots about going back in time and advising yourself as a younger person. That's Hollywood garbage, okay? I'm a consultant to Hollywood, and they don't always listen to me or my colleagues, okay? That makes good television or good films, but it's not real.
Here is another question from Lasha. Why don't we automatically ascend when we leave our bodies?
Well, because we have a karmic cycle. Why don't you automatically graduate as soon as you enroll in college? You got to pass tests, right?
It's true.
Well, these are karmic tests, same principle. So there are no givens. You could be on the earth plane or in the karmic cycle forever. I don't recommend that because this dimension is actually, there's only two dimensions in the universe that are negative. The lower astral plane, which is the source of psychic attack, and this one. Every other dimension is positive. So there's no incentive to be here. You want to get out of here. And you want to get out of here by growth. Not by suicide, not a good idea, not by being murdered. No, you want to get out of here by spiritual growth, by connecting with your higher self.
Because if we don't, we're going to repeat this until we learn the lesson, right? That we're supposed to, right?
What do they say? Yeah, what do they say about history? If a man doesn't learn by history, if you don't learn by history, you're doomed to repeat it.
That's right, yeah.
Same principle.
Same principle. Okay, Philip Blair, how can we heal an energy vampire who wants help?
Oh, if they want help, you can train them. You can help them connect with their higher self. That's what I do. And that's what the Spiritual Growth Experience CD album will help you to do.
Let me see if I find anything else here for you. Otherwise, I have more. Oh, here. Scott Posma. What can we do to improve our No, I think he meant psychic. It's just spelled wrong. And other abilities.
Yeah, he means psychic. Yeah, he means psychic. Go ahead.
That's the question.
Oh, what
can we do what can we do to improve our psychic and other abilities?
All right, well, you can simply access your higher self. That's what I call the superconscious mind tap, and that's what I do, and that's what all my CDs do, and or we can do that with sessions. He can improve his, in other words, he wants his psychic ability, like things like out-of-body experiences, seeing the future, parallel universes. That's what he means by that. Psychic protection is also part of that.
You remember earlier, this is myself, by the way, now I'm breaking free of the questions here. Remember how you were earlier mentioning, like, I think it was 1500s and virtually from that time frame, there was really nothing? I always give the point of, if you look at 1900 to say 1970, I mean, we were astronomical in growth. Yet, if you look at 850 AD to 850 AD, those 1,000 years are like nothing, really nothing. And so the inference is, of course, that we've had to have help. And I'm assuming that the help was, like you said, from futurist chrononauts and from the ETs that
also
met
to buttress the point, or to make this point clearer. Yes, there have been UFO sightings in those days, but not many, okay? Most of the sightings have been in the last 100 years, or since Roswell. There is a monograph. It's sort of like a newspaper from Basel, Switzerland, that was 1562 or something around there. And I have it. You can check this out. If you look at it, it's a newspaper in the 16th century, and it will show up in the sky a bunch of black spheres and a UFO craft. Okay? And there's another one from Germany, from Nuremberg, again showing UFO crafts. So
it has
been documented.
And cigar shapes. That's right.
There's a famous Renaissance painting that was done, sequestered by the Vatican, right? They paid for this, right? They sponsored it, and it shows it was like one of these Virgin Mary things, one of these religious paintings, and it shows a UFO in the sky. Okay, it's been shown on TV shows, all these like. History Channel, all this kind of stuff. They're famous. There are. Remember, the Vatican knew about that, right? They didn't say get rid of that UFO. They paint it over. It's on there. So very famous. So yes, there have been UFO sightings throughout history. However, not in statistical significance. That's the difference.
One of the reasons people say that there's been such a jump is because ever since we started slicing atoms and creating nuclear explosions. The reason being is the inference is that we're affecting other dimensions or other universes, more so possibly than even our own.
Well, we're affecting actually the current universe. If you look at the history of nuclear energy from 1945 from the Manhattan Project, you'll find, and into the 50s when we began our space program, you'll find that there were a lot of times where the UFO sightings, the extraterrestrials are monitoring us. In some cases, actually trying to prevent us from going into space. A lot of the problems we had with the space program, we had Werner von Braun, the ex-Nazi, that we took over in World War II,
Mm-hmm.
Yes, paperclip, right. So my point is, but there were a lot of problems, and there were like some false alerts with the nuclear weapons in the 50s and early 60s that have been documented, that the DoD documents, and they actually released those. We could actually get access to that, and that was due to crafts, extraterrestrial crafts. And there were a lot of our pilots that would see observations. They called them Foo Fighters in World War II.
That's right.
And then, of course, we had the extra crafts. We called them UFOs and the flying saucers since 1947, from Arnold's description. So yes, they've been around. Okay, people can argue it all they want to. Project Blue Book was terminated because it was getting too close to reality. So they've been around. So please, a couple of things. UFOs are real. Extraterrestrials are real. Parallel universes are real. There's really you can argue all you want. The science is clear. There's too much evidence. And, you have some people that have phony cases. That's true. There's always phony cases of things. But the real cases are the ones that trump, so to speak, the phony cases. So there are real examples.
And they stand the test of time. That's absolutely true. Like I always look at Bob Lazar, right? I mean, that guy I've always believed since '89, and even 30 years later, there have been like 6 different things that have happened that have just added to his story to say, wait a minute, he was telling the truth. He did not lie. And
I'm surprised. I know his Element 115 too. Remember that? Mm-hmm. I'm surprised that he wasn't killed by the Men in Black, because he released a lot of information. Remember that in 1979 they had that what was it, Dulce, New Mexico?
Wars,
you had that hissy fit between the reptilians and the Greys, and they killed a lot of our military base that was there, and a couple of people escaped. And we talk about it. Of course, they were killed by the Men in Black, but not until after they released the information. So that was an example of underground bases, and that's another story. There are hundreds of underground bases in America, going all the way from Colorado to New Mexico to California. There's lots of underground bases. I mean, people think that's a Hollywood scam. No, it isn't. There really are. They're exotic, and they house ETs.
And they also are connected, I hear, for maglev trains.
Yeah, that's what I hear too. I don't know the reality of that, but I hear that too, that they're connected. So it's almost like you could go from one end of the country underground, I'd like to see some evidence of that, but that's what I hear too. But, we don't know. But I know there are lots of underground bases.
I haven't seen the trains themselves, but I have seen these giant machines that bore underground. And what they do is they heat the sand, or the sand essentially so high that to such a degree that as it's boring through the tunnel, the sand is turned into a glass, and it's huge.
Right.
When
well,
you see
that's
the
what
men
will
standing
happen.
in front of it.
If you have a nuclear explosion, let's say in the Sahara Desert or in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, what will happen as a result of that is you will have fused glass. And there are examples. I should give you an example of what I call forbidden archaeology. There are places in northwestern India where there are examples of nuclear explosions that go back a minimum of 1,500 years. Now, nuclear explosions on this planet do not occur naturally. You have to have 100% pure water, plutonium, things like that. So how do you explain nuclear? And there are fused glass, by the way, in the Saudi Arabia desert too, as well as the deserts in Israel and Jordan. Where do you get that from? You get that from nuclear explosion, which means somebody had a nuclear bomb 1500 BC, okay, minimum. And if you read the Eastern literature, like the Bhagavad Gita,
the Hindu text, that's right.
Right. You talk about the nuclear war that was going on, and that was Atlantis and Lemuria too. But they talk about that, and the flying crafts, the Vimanas, and the Valaks. The Vimanas were the Indian crafts, the Valaks were the Atlantean crafts that were like cigar-shaped crafts that would have nuclear weapons on them. So where was primitive man? We don't even know the origin of the Bhagavad Gita. It's at least 1500 BC. It's probably about 4,000 or 5,000 BC. Where does primitive man, and that's primitive man, I'll call them primitive, even though they were farmers, they're still primitive. Where would they get the idea of a nuclear bomb? There's no farmers don't think about that.
Yeah,
And in
no,
the
they
Hindu
don't.
scriptures, by the way, they talk about a millionth of a second and a billion years. There's only one discipline that requires that kind of numbers, and that's nuclear physics. Okay, farmers do not need to know about a millionth of a second. That's not how you grow crops, nor
No,
to a billion years.
that's right. Or
Okay?
the power of
But
a thousand suns or things like
it's
that.
in their literature. Okay, it's in their literature, which has been carbon dated. We know the origins, at least the minimum origin of the literature. Okay, it's been probably recopied many times, but it's at least 1500 BC, which is 3,500 years ago. Okay, so where do they get that? Okay, there's no, unless there's reality. Okay, so to me, it just gives more evidence to things that we consider to be forbidden archaeology.
That's true. That's true. Now, here, I'm going to take this question out of order because it pertains to what we're talking about, the MIB. Where do the men in black come from?
Well, the men in black come from several places. Okay, we have there are 4 different types of men in black. So just this is not something you're going to see on television shows. Okay, there are men in black that represent from the Air Force. These are the current ones that most people will have connections with. Okay, so these are what I call current Earth Day people from our own military. Okay, so that's type 1. The second type is men in black from the future. Okay, so they also at the same time want to prevent people from experiencing things like ETs or time travelers. That's a no-no. Okay, then there are men in black from the lower astral plane. Okay, so these are, by the way, the Air Force ones are, it's called the Air Force Special Activity Center, or AFSAC. It's the 1127th Field Activities Group. Okay, and then there's the ones from the lower astral plane. We call that the Black Brotherhood. They're also time travelers. They go along with the ones from the future and the ones from the current Air Force altogether. So if you add them up all together, you're going to get 4 different types. And they all have the same MO, which is, prevent people on this planet anyway from knowing about extraterrestrials or time travelers. Now, the classic Men in Black are the ones that dressed in black suits, wearing white shirts. Not, by the way, not the movie Men in Black. That's a comedy with Will Smith. You know, that's not even close. Okay, they have sinister looks to them. They drive large black cars. We find
That are unknown, by the way. I spoke to somebody
yeah,
who's
you
does research on them.
You trace the license plate, and it doesn't exist, right? They travel with Cadillacs in America and Jaguars in Great Britain. The license plates, as I mentioned, are always phony. They may appear alone, but they're usually in groups of 2 or 3, 3 being the most common. They represent themselves as government agents, but of course no agency recognizes them or will relate to them. Very unusual electrical events occur when they're around, so this gives you some of the extraterrestrial aspect of them. They always attempt to silence witnesses by threats. Okay, they're very tall with unnaturally long fingers. And unmarked black helicopters are occasionally piloted by men in black. And if you sight a UFO, you'll very often find black helicopters around your house. And then, of course, you're going to get a visit by a man in black. So they're not nice people. They are vicious, and they can take you to an underground laboratory or an underground military base where you definitely don't want to be interrogated because they're nasty. And like I say, they're not for our best interests. But that's your tax dollars at work, at least for the AFSAC people.
Now, in the interest of time, because we are running out and there are a few more questions, let me pick, let's see, 2 of the questions I'm going to tell the listeners. If you just go back to the beginning of the show, Dr. Goldberg does answer these questions, but let me ask the ones that I think you have not covered. Clearly, this one is different. What's his view on the black-eyed kids?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a thing where some of them think they're demonically possessed, or they're extraterrestrial. Again, you can't make a blanket statement about them. Nobody knows. You'd have to actually work with them. Let's just say that if you get a Caucasian kid, especially with black eyes, you're in trouble. Keep away. They could be actually possessed kids too. So it's not a good concept. That's not a natural color. Certain Asian groups will have black eyes, but not Caucasians.
You know, I've actually seen an Iraqi girl who has a problem with pigmentation and her eyes are red. And this is not a joke. I mean, it freaked me out. And yet some people consider
Well,
that very
red
holy.
eye. Just to give an example, in my book, Protected by the Light, I give symptoms of psychic attack, and one of them is red eyes. Okay, so that person has a lot of problems.
Yeah, yeah, I fear for that little girl. You know, that's absolutely true. Well, you know, it's been truly an amazing adventure, Dr. Goldberg. We can't wait 3 years to do this again. We have to do this again in a few months. And let me ask you this: if you have one statement to cover everything you said, what would it be?
All right, my statement is to connect with your higher self and to become psychically empowered and to eliminate fear. And for the benefit of your listeners, again, if they go to my website, drbrucegoldberg.com with the DR for the doctor, and they order my book, Exploring the Fifth Dimension, my most recent book, and they mention the show, then they get a free fifth dimensional travel CD. I also do sessions by computer, as I mentioned, and all my book CDs are on the website. And if they don't have a computer for any reason, they can call my number 1-800-KARMA for you, 1-800-527-6248. And they can. I'll send them all the information out, including a free exercise, written exercise, if they order it by 800 number, about how to enter into the fifth dimension.
Well said, and I could tell from all the people in the chat that this has truly been an amazing show. Let me remind everybody, too, that if you want to get a hold of me, just remember, the only thing you have to remember is the name of the show, folks. That is Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. Everything from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Patreon, LinkedIn, whatever you think of, everything that could possibly have a username, it is going to be DRJ Radio Live. That's why I chose it. That's why it's not Dr. G Live or Dr. G Radio. I had to choose Dr. J Radio Live because it's the only thing across the board that I can get, especially those of you that are in YouTube. And also BitTube. I'm going to start doing things on BitTube, Twitch, and other stuff like that, just to throw the whole gambit at everybody. With that being said, folks, this is Dr. J signing off with the one and only Dr. Bruce Goldberg.